Hello.
This meeting is being recorded.
Great, excellent. So we're just missing one person.
Just to check, is the mirror link that I shared working? Or does it have to come from maybe Bea or Catalina?
I can't get in at all. It won't let me in yet. I'm not sure what's happening, but I'll try. Do you want to do something now, and it'll probably notify me, and I'll see if I can actually get in.
Yeah, but no worries, Olo. If in any case, we will be sharing the screen with the mirror, and I will be taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't manage to enter, I can be your transcriber there.
I think, Bea, you need to change the setting on the mirror so that anyone with the link can edit. Because I can't do that.
Ah, so that's part of it as well. Okay.
But anyone with a link can view it right now. You just can't add stuff yet.
Well, I can't even view it. For some reason, my I think it's a university thing from my end. It's not letting me log in, but anyway, I have asked.
Yeah, no, Mira is notorious for having frustrating. But Ola, the link that I just dropped in the chat, the last one, the very short one, if you click on that, it might help.
Okay, I'll try that now.
Yeah, that will allow to view, but will not allow to edit.
Oh, but that's fine. Yeah, I can view it. That's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Great. So step forward.
Did the rest manage to open the mirror board?
Yes, and I can edit for some reason. I don't know why, but I've tried. And I won't mess up, but
No, the mysteries of of technology.
Andrea, it's nice to finally see the person behind the email.
Oh, you haven't met. Well, maybe, Patricia, shall we kick off?
Yeah.
Because we're already recording,
Yes.
and even if Amina joins, she can do it later.
I was thinking the same. So should I start with introducing the workshop, and then we can have a quick round of introductions as well. So yes, before we start on the technicalities, but good morning to everyone, and welcome to Workshop 9. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Beatrice De Carli. I am a reader in urbanism at London Metropolitan University, and I'm co-convening the workshop with Catalina Ortiz and Ola Uduku. And so the title of the workshop is Urban Design from the Global Southeast, Imagining Just Futures. And what we wanted to do with this workshop is to focus and have a discussion at the intersection between critical design and specifically critical approaches to urban design primarily and development studies. So we started the workshop to explore the significance of critical design in an urban context, and also to interrogate the relationship between this field and development studies, and as well as development practice. And you will see on the mirror board already there are quite a few questions that start populating it and start interrogating this tension or this space of overlap as we've been looking at it between these areas. So to explore this field, we are hoping to spend the next half an hour, 40 minutes having a conversation around urban design ontologies, theories, and practices in advancing justice and in advancing sort of more just urban futures. And following the workshop, we will be writing up a blog post summarizing some of the key themes and the key questions that will emerge from our discussion. And this is something that we're also interested in doing collaboratively. So it's something that could involve all of us who are here online. And we also hope that today is really just the start of a broader conversation, and we are quite interested in nurturing this space of conversation further via collaborative events and writing in the future. So in this sense, we are hoping that with the workshop, we will be able to take some time to articulate together maybe more and more precise questions that concern the relation between critical design and development. As for today's program, so we will start by hearing from our two presenters, John Bennett and Amina Shahid, whom I hope managed to join the workshop in the meantime. And they will be briefly sharing key highlights and questions that emerged from the papers and the papers that they shared on the conference website. Following these summaries, Ola, Catalina, and myself will provide a few very short commentaries and questions, again, to stimulate discussion, and we will then open the floor for a broader conversation. And in principle, we would like all of us, including ourselves, to keep our comments quite short and maybe 2 or 3 minutes each, so that we keep the conversation going and moving in the time we have. And as you know, as you've seen, we've also set up this Miro board for the workshop. So if you open that, everyone can now access it. Feel free to add notes to the board itself during the workshop at any time, but also we will keep it open for a few days afterwards so that the conversation can continue. So without taking any more time, thanks for joining us. And I was wondering, maybe before we start, we could have a quick round of introductions, and then we'll pass the word to Jono. But first, yeah, maybe Catalina and Ola, if you want to join.
Sure. So I'm Catalina Ortiz. I work at the Development Planning Unit, and I'm the co-program leader of the Urban Design and Development Program. So for me, it's very important and interesting to be here because this is at the very core of what I work 24/7 pretty much. And we have, still a long way to go to actually address the key questions that we pose for this workshop. So welcome everyone.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Ola Duku. I'm head of School of Architecture at Liverpool, and I was invited by Beatrice and Catalina to join this, to help co-convene this workshop, which I think is really interesting. I think the topic being explored is relevant, and it'll be really good to open the discussion, which I've said already in my commentary. So welcome to the workshop, and I hope we can all contribute.
Shall we move to, in the order I see them in the screen, maybe Jono, quick intro, or maybe no, Andrea, Zino, Paroj, and Asma, and Tuesday, and then we move to the presentations perhaps, because the contributors will be introducing themselves in any case.
Yeah, Andrea, I work at UCL, and I'm not a designer, but I've been working a lot with designer, and we've been thinking a lot about the limits of the design practice as it is, and especially because the field of practice is in the global south, we have been kind of having conversation around the lines of the question that I've seen here.
Hello to everyone. I'm called Victorine Zino. I'm from Cameroon, Yaoundé. I work at the Ministry of Scientific Research and Innovation. My research focuses on urbanities. So I'm here really to learn about designing and have information on the topic in order to have more skills in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paroj, maybe, and Asma after.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Paroj. I work at the DPU, and I work very closely with Catalina and Andrea. So it's great that we have joined in this session. I have joined here mainly as an audience and to understand the importance of design in the urban spatial context, because I work on alternative visions of home and people's idea of home and what it means for people to build home beyond the dominant or commonly understood arrangements of a home. So, and I think one thing that I've actually not looked at is design, which is so important in sort of so I think, and that's what I'm looking forward to in this session. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. And sorry, I'm not able to turn on the video or use the chat function very easily today because there's some issues with my laptop. So thanks so much for understanding.
No worries. Maybe Asma?
I think Asma typed in the chat they cannot turn on the camera and is listening, I think.
Great. Maybe Tuesday or Nekbet would like to do a quick introduction.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Tuesday Gichuki, a visiting professor at the University of Makeni, Sierra Leone, but based in Nairobi, Kenya. I also represent the Global South in the DSA Council. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And we're missing perhaps just Necdet, just to go quickly.
Sure. Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. So it's Necdet. I'm based in Turkey. I have a background in communications and cultural studies and design theory, and have been taking part in this year's conference with a presentation on knowledge production and development. Thank you. Hi again.
Thank you. I think we have everyone now. So I'd like to ask John if you would like to start by sharing a summary of the paper that you shared, and if anyone, I think most of us might have accessed it ahead, but maybe we're also interested in hearing what might be some of the key questions that you think are your paper is raising for discussion.
Thanks. Sorry, I apologize. I'm traveling. I'm in a potentially noisy room, but I found the quietest corner. What I shared in my paper was this sort of summary of my current doctoral focus, and as a result, it sounds a little bit more, I think, washed out and a bit more sort of not so strong in what it's trying to say. Because I think the nature of doctoral studies in this early phase is that we're still trying to decide what it's going to be. But my practice background, because I come from South Africa and I come from a practice sort of space, was over 10 years of working with these issues on the ground through my co-founded organization, One-to-One Agency of Engagement. So I guess I have these questions about design from a Southern perspective, not as here's a set of kind of ways of working, but more how do we contextualize design that affects an urban scale through different set of values, through different set of understanding, through different set of conditions that I think most of what we get explained as urban design from a sort of Western/Northern education system. But I think One-to-One's sort of been figuring out its version of that in South Africa. So my questions are more about how do I theoretically frame my practice work? How do I make my practice work speak to these questions of a Southern framing, which I'm finding very helpful to understand my own work. And more importantly, I'm looking at what do these methods and actions sort of really could they look like? And that's what the work that I'm busy with is starting to both visually and physically demonstrate these. And I'm sort of exploring techniques of trying to show that. So while I might not give clear examples of what I'm doing, I'm more exploring the methods of translating the values of Southern practice into more shareable and accessible formats for now. Who knows what the PhD will generate in the next year or two. I think that's a brief enough summary for now.
Fantastic, thank you. Amina, would you also like to share some of the key highlights from the paper you submitted?
Hello. So the text that I have submitted is basically looking at decolonial perspectives towards development. And it's again like our Miro board. So it's at the intersection of development studies and urban design and even architecture, just design practice. And also a bit towards education, because I'm interested in looking at how we approach the epistemics in design. So specifically looking at informality, which is prevalent in the developing world. I'm interested to look at how the words are being used, right? For example, informality and how it denotes by negation. So what does it dismiss? Like what kind of knowledge and power is being carried in the terms that we're using to study and describe these places? And consequently, then we're practicing in the same way. So, and how is that kind of a colonial practice, and it's inhibiting more contextualized solutions to, say, inequality and otherness, which is present in these sites. I'm looking at Islamabad specifically because it's a planned city, but I'm looking at how architects and planners behave more as development consultants with very Eurocentric ways of practice and Eurocentric theories and ideals. And then how that produces spaces like geographical hubs and spatial hubs of informality and how the refugee settlements are then also linked with in the production of informality. So I want to focus a lot on the production of informality rather than the presence. So looking at the structural forces and even the pedagogy that is producing these spaces rather than just looking at their presence as a culprit in itself.
Thank you. Thanks. And I would now maybe ask Ola, would you like to share? Because obviously we had your audio comment as recorded, but I was wondering if you would like to share your comments now with everyone.
Yeah, I can do. I mean, I was sort of saying that it's an area that I, to be honest, don't have that much, at least theoretical perspective on. I think that Jono's paper, which I'd listened to or that he'd provided beforehand, gave a very good analysis of the kind of, what would I call it, critical research that has been done in the areas. And, you know, he called up the likely authors, but they are all very much to do with, I guess, less to do with design and more to do with the critique of urbanism, which again suggests that there is a lacuna or gap in this area of theoretical understanding. So that's good because it means that it's ripe for debate. But I guess, indeed, taking on Amina's points now, there's that issue about where is the debate situated? I mean, we should be very careful not to replicate what is a very Western perspective as to what we do, because as she has rightly pointed out, what you do have, therefore, is Southern bodies going back to the South, but coming in with the baggage of Western analysis of what planning may or may not be. So anecdotally, I mean, I take, for example, the idea about what is urban density and when is it overcrowded. If you only use a room to sleep in occasionally, I mean, if there are 4 people or 4 bodies in that room, and most of the time they're not there, some people might be working part-time and so on, it's not necessarily overcrowded in the sense of the way in which it would be reported, even by, you know, the likes of UN Habitat. So it's this issue about, indeed, where is the epistemological rooting of some of the words we use and even the ways in which we think. And that really should go right down to what the art and design lot would call design thinking. I mean, it really does mean we need to think, we need to deconstruct. It's a structural issue as to how knowledge is both disseminated and understood, which is something that hopefully we can start a useful discussion about, because for too long, these are indeed the boundaries, or the boundaries through which we are viewing issues in the South, particularly in relation to design.
Thank you. And Catalina, would you like to also add?
I mean, very briefly, because I think it could be great to devote more time to our discussion and maybe share what we have in our hands. I think both contributions are very interesting and kind of cover different aspects of what we are discussing today. And I think looking at Jono's work, it made me think also in kind of what are the innovations, you know, that we need to put in place to actually document the practice itself. To reveal what Amina calls the production of informality, for instance. And I think that is one strand that brings, you know, pushes us as designers or people interested in design to think of different visual strategies that oftentimes perhaps people from the social science don't have at hand. And I think that is one of the powers perhaps of what can design do. But at the same time, I wonder to what extent we are also reducing the idea of the approach to Southern Eastern cities to the production of informality only. What else is there, right? Because I can see that you cannot also limit the perspective of the urban in the so-called global South as only the production of informality. And that is kind of the prevalent kind of approaches of, you know, saying that that is, your exceptionality, therefore you need to just focus on that. But I think, as we know, cities in the so-called global south are much more than that, and have proven to be innovative sites to think issues such as smart cities, issues about innovations about technologies of mobility, of addressing very differently how you engage in participatory processes. So there's plenty of innovations happening already. And perhaps because of our inadequate lenses, we also, perhaps reproduce some perspectives of what the Southern city is about. So I will leave it there before we move. So Beatrice.
Great, and maybe I could also, so that we start moving on to the mirror board and other comments, maybe I can explain some of the comments I added there as a way of shifting as well to that space. And maybe a couple of things that I wanted to share. One is that it seemed to me that one of the key, or the sort of foundational questions that both papers address, more in terms of looking at praxis and methodologies in that sphere, concerns the agency of urban design and planning in shaping cities. And what we have added here as an initial question for the workshop was also looking at what is the role of urban design to imagine just futures. And I was adding there a comment following that, there was maybe shifting that question to thinking, what is the agency of design? And if we understand agency at least I do with thinking with feminist thinkers, I would think about agency as relational and emerging from relationships. Then I was thinking a key question maybe for us to reflect on, maybe what are the relations and what is the relational landscape that might allow us to nurture different forms of design, and where does our practice of design sit within in these relational landscapes. And I think there was a lot in both papers. I think there was sort of reconsidering, I was talking about reconsidering the role of planners and designers, and where do they sit in a constellation. And I think a lot of the work that John was exposing on sort of being situated had to do with tracing that landscape. And in that question, I'm also thinking then, how do we sort of trace that landscape, but also how we project it forward? How do we become more explicit and maybe more intentional in placing design within certain sets of relations and not others? And then another maybe set of questions that I had to offer to the discussion was linked more to the points on theory and the question that also Catalina had set up in the board, asking how to overcome the coloniality of design's theoretical framings and also that disjuncture with practice. And I was partly drawing for this. I was also thinking whether there might be a value in looking at different histories and trajectories of design, because we're seeing sometimes to give for granted that there is sort of a homogeneous history, this northern history of design that is that we are trying to grapple with and shift. And I was also just curious to hear for everyone, like, what are maybe the other histories or genealogies of design that we draw from? Like, for instance, I've been recently looking, and I think there's a session also later today, looking at the HICS, the Habitat International Coalition's traditions in learning and cooperative movements, and how architects and planners have been working as part of those movements. So I've been thinking, is there a value maybe looking back at some of those histories and highlighting them as other trajectories in design? And I would have more questions too, but I don't want to take too much time. So maybe we were thinking if anyone else who's been already adding thoughts to the mirror board wants to share as well what they have been adding there, that might be a useful starting point, or really anyone who wants to add comments.
So maybe just to make sure that you are all following, and if you have the link, basically we have kind of set up this, key questions in terms of the overlap, and then some of provocations in the 3 spheres that the focus of the workshop is about. So if anyone would like to share a bit more of what they have added here, or if they have some other ideas or responses, or more questions even to what we've been explaining now.
Dead silence. Well, I've just put another semicircle around, is it Beatrice's diagram, which is a kind of NGO effect, because I think that is important in terms of how design is manifested, because they are such big players that I think they do push some of these discussions. So back to what's just been said about the history, if we go back to the history, certainly by the time, what was it, the IBRD, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which precedes the World Bank, once they get involved in construction and development and design, they do have, I would say, a significant influence on how we think about design and so on, particularly in the global South. So I think one has to acknowledge their influence, even from a theoretical perspective, because it's normally very much driven by economics more than anything else, although they do have architects and so on their boards, but in reality it's an economic discussion that they're having about how things happen, again from a Western perspective.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think one of the
sorry John, I think Andrea had his hand up.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. No, just something short. I really love the question from Beatrice around what is the relational landscape and design as a relational practice. And for example, in the work I do with my colleagues, I'm not going to the kind of work, but we do a lot of co-design processes. And for those co-design processes, in a way, we need a sort of a pedagogy of space and relations. So a lot of the work we do is basically around building together that awareness of around space and how space influence relationships to then enable non-designers to design their urban space. And particularly we do this a lot also with children. So I think that's for us is very important that you know, and so one of our question and our interrogation is, what are these pedagogies and these tools to really learn together about space, relations, and the agency of design in shaping these relationships. And the other thing that emerged a lot from our practice is how design is a very unique tool, which is sometimes really placed in a privileged position to negotiate conflicts explicitly. You know, especially within different groups, between different interests, sometimes you know, the putting into space and proposing some intervention can allow us really to talk explicitly about the trade-offs, about who benefits, who lose, that we were unable to do. I was less able to do before I encountered this practice together with designer. Even when I was doing participatory planning as a slightly more higher scale, it was a little bit more difficult. But when you get to a very situated place and you start talking about conflicts and issues, you really bring up again that relational aspects of relationships, and you can through design negotiate or even highlight those conflicts.
Thank you. Jono.
Sorry, I can't see the rest of the group, but if there's other people who are not part of the speaking panel who want to go first, I can come back. Okay, maybe I'll just go. No, I think, to me, what I think is one of the things that, looking at it through a Southern perspective, and to me, like what I understand about Southern Southern theory, Southern urbanism, Southern approaches, is it recognizes important aspects of like they're saying, relationality, but towards power. So this idea that like the center, the north, gets to decide these things that are so sort of normative, and then we have to always respond back in a way, even my own research, I've had to like name all of these, like what I call them, the usual suspects, in order to then locate what I'm doing, to then step to the side and say, actually, this is not what I'm focusing on. And I think there's something about recognizing those power relationships within the kind of, epistemology, within the kind of literature that we somehow have to acknowledge within the kind of doing of Southern work with Southern urban design. So for example, even co-design is not strong enough, because co-design in a way implies that we're coming at it the same, but actually the power dynamics of even me as a white South African in South Africa are not, as a person who's suddenly located, suddenly situated, my other relationships to the center make that work not a equal platform. So to somehow like really proactively, critically acknowledge these power differentials or these power imbalances, to me is like a very Southern thing, because you have to work outside of like a normative centrist idea that we're all coming at this the same. And like lots of design theory actually, or like within outside of architecture, urban design, it comes from sort of like Northern Europe, where there are fairly strong social systems that allow people to enter design conversations in these sort of co-productive, co-design kind of cooperative ways. So I think that's really important for me to recognize. In the comments somewhere in there, I made it about, we should also just be careful about the romanticization about people's agency, and that sure, like people from the grassroots, from backgrounds that are disadvantaged, they have a lot more power to do things in certain senses, but also systemically, they've been, a lot of the power is taken away. And I don't think it's fair to heap all of this expectation on people who are already so marginalized to somehow, in a very romantic way, overcome huge, massive global systemic issues to do something that in another context would be very normal. So I think the kind of developmentist lens is something that I've been struggling with. And like why can't design from the South just be design? Why does it always have to be? I think Leslie Loker speaks about this a lot in her work in the GSA and now with the AFR, and that she also wants to explore design as on its own terms, that it can be beautiful and celebrated and can do things that doesn't always have to speak to a UN habitat goal or a USDG or something. And again, we can bring our own responsibilities to our work, and I think it's important to acknowledge that now as well. But I do think Southern design also should be allowed to, or an approach should also just be allowed to accept it on its own terms, not always have to like respond to some sort of like romanticized ideal of responsible practice as its only way to practice. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else that wanted to? I realize we only have 5 minutes left. It's a very short window.
Perhaps we can move to the other spheres that maybe we haven't touched upon. I think something that I don't remember where I wrote it now at this point, but who's entitled to actually define as a Southern designer? So what is the positionalities of it? Because I think oftentimes that is linked to what John was proposing in a way. Who's entitled to say that is doing a Southern practice, and who counts as designer in that case, right? And I think that's something perhaps important to acknowledge, and something that, in a way, this is one of the questions that I pose as well, is what remains unknowable for Western frameworks and how to account the collective ontologies, which I think could help us to give a kind of a last push to our conversation, and maybe making room for any other comments. I know Ola has to leave, and I don't know if you have kind of some wrap-up remarks, or if anyone else that is in the room would like to, that hasn't talked yet, would like to bring their perspective.
I think it would be nice to have other people in the room get involved. Otherwise, again, we are guilty of what we've just talked about.
I just want to give a quick comment in response to what Catalina's saying, again, relating to Jono's comment on, I think like in my presentation, I was talking about the permission to narrate, and I was interested in how otherness is created when some body of power, some source of knowledge is actually entitled to decide or to categorize the other practices. So like Kata is asking, you know, who is going to decide what is Southern? And so that just takes me back to what I was speaking in my presentation, that how the Occident would define the Orient, and they would tell them, you know, what is and what is not, and what can be and what cannot be. And just like the formal telling, okay, formal is dictating what is the informal. Like, even though it's so difficult and complex to talk about these things, but we're defining it, who's drawing the thresholds, and like the permission to narrate, like who has the permission to narrate. So it's also relating back to the idea of romanticization of these non-academic sources of knowledge, because when there's an outside perspective entitled to define a certain complex practice, I think it brings a certain kind of romanticization, which is not authentic to the actual knowledge or actual practices. So I'm just linking those and finding that very interesting.
Sounds good. I think I'm going to have to go. But yeah, I mean, keep the Miro board working now that I can get into it and I can actually talk to it. It's excellent. So happy discussions if you're not cut off, but I've got to get ready for my next meeting. I think it's a really good beginning to the discussion, which I think we just need to develop further and maybe start putting in readings that we think are relevant as well. That'd be quite good. So bye.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly. Yeah, that that note that we added on, like, who is each of us thinking with, like, what are some of the ideas that are actually helping, and thinkers or people that are helping us to think through these points. And I think we made a few references, but it would be useful to add to that, like, with specificity, because I was thinking back as well, John, your comment on Southern design, and Catalina, I think you were making a similar point initially on do we constrain Southern design to be developmental and respond to those? And I think it's very important. And at the same time, the specific intersection that we were looking at here is how does that word of that much broader word of critical design overlap or intersect with development studies. And I think it is important that we remind ourselves that that's a specificity. No, it's not trying to include any type of design that comes from a Southern perspective. But yeah, and the other point that I was thinking maybe to note, it's important to note down was our conversation, Catalina, in preparation for the workshop, where you were mentioning, for instance, that a lot of the literature that you are looking at the moment is not even translated into English. So they're in this thinking about who do we think with and where do we think from. I think there's a lot also, you know, there's a theme of translation, not just of language translation, but of how ideas circulate and where and how can we facilitate this circulation, at least within this network and this set of relations. That would be, I'd be very curious, like, to have a more detailed conversation on that, and what is it that we're actually reading, and can we be translators for each other in a sense of some of those ideas. Would anyone else like to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think just to see ourselves at the end, because I think we're running out of time. So more in terms of the practicalities, we're going to have the link of the Miro app. So it would be great if you can keep feeding it, and maybe perhaps for the ones that didn't make it early, the idea is that we're going to be co-producing a blog post based on these discussions. It would be great if you can keep feeding it. And if you would like to be involved in this blog writing, please just drop us a line and then we can set up the practicalities of it. But we would like just to, on the one hand, document this moment, but on the other, start growing this list of people that are interested in this intersection, because it's you know, the fact that it's not a very hot topic in terms of this intersection and there's no massive amount of people drawn to be talking about this is also data for us, right? And how can we make this discussion more open? So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope we keep the conversation going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think Eunice